Smart aesthetic, branding, marketing, entrepreneurship.
Greetings and welcome back to the Kiss My Aesthetic podcast. I'm so excited to have fellow social media manager Shannon on the podcast today. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're really excited. We're going to do a little bit of a podcast swap. Your podcast, Tropical Social Podcast.
Yes, I am so excited.
It's going to be super fun. So this is part one, and we'll consider that part two. And we'll kind of trade traffic with each other, which will be really fun. But for anyone who doesn't know you, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and who you help?
Yes, of course. So I am Shannon, as you said, and I am a social media manager, strategist, as well as mentor. So I actually help female-led brands as well as freelancers, specifically other social media managers, actually get visible and monetize their brands on social. So I particularly specialize in Instagram marketing. That's kind of like my bread and butter. And I also host, just like you mentioned, a podcast for fellow social media managers called The Tropical Social. So I've been doing that for the past few years. It's been really fun. But yeah, The Tropical Social basically helps social media managers build a business around their dream lifestyle, not the other way around. And as we actually just talked about right before we hopped on this podcast interview, I am also a digital nomad myself. I have been now for like the past 4-ish years, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, we are fully here now.
Nice. No, you're in good company because everything you just said is what we believe in, right? I tell this to my team all the time. It's like we work so that we can live. We don't live to work. Like it needs to be balanced, and it needs to be a lifestyle that is sustaining, because when it's not sustaining, it's really draining. But I'm curious about your digital nomad story, because I think we're in similar number of podcast episodes, because this will be in the 170s. I think you're in the high hundreds as well. Or just passed not too long ago, which is exciting. So it's fun to kind of have like a chronicle. Like I kind of wish I had podcasted when I was a digital nomad, because I was just coming across so many interesting people in so many interesting places. But tell us your travel origin story, because I think that's just as interesting as the business story.
Yeah. So kind of like how I started the whole social media management spiel. Okay.
Yeah. Give us the whole thing.
Cut me off if this is like too long, but basically like my whole journey into social media marketing really began like my senior year of college. So when I was supposed to be studying for finals, I was scrolling on Facebook and, you know, the usual college student procrastinating type of deal. That was me. And so I ended up coming across like a Facebook ad of 2 women who were doing the whole working online and traveling the world thing. And that was kind of like what got me hooked. And eventually I was like, okay, like I know I want to start my own online business someday and live abroad. I just did not know exactly like what that kind of business was actually going to look like, or, you know, what I would actually do at the time. So after college, I still really did the whole traditional corporate route. That is very much what my parents pushed upon me. Like that was kind of like the only road that I knew, which I'm sure can relate to a lot of you. But I ended up working for a startup Instagram marketing company down in San Diego. And so
that's where I am. I'm in San Diego. Did we not figure this out yet?
No. Okay.
I live in San Diego. Funny.
I did not know that. Okay. Well, I might actually be moving back there in like a year or two. So I will definitely be connecting with you. But yeah, that job was kind of like the game changer for me personally. Sure. It just really made me realize like the power of social media marketing and just how much I actually enjoyed helping small business owners really elevate their brands on social media. So that was kind of like my quote unquote light bulb moment. And like from there, I really knew like, okay, I really want to work in social media marketing. And I actually want to turn like my skills and passion into like my own business and into my own service. So very long story short, at the time I was dating a guy. He got stationed in another state. So I was kind of like at that point, 6 months into my job, I absolutely hated it. And I was like, okay, now's the time to kind of like make the leap. So I ended up moving clear across the country to live with him. I did babysitting as well as just trying to like honestly listen to every podcast and YouTube channel and take all the courses and, you know, kind of do all the things. Just to really start learning like online marketing skills. And then shortly before Christmas of 2019, I discovered my boyfriend was cheating on me. So that was, yeah, kind of a rough story, but that was kind of my like kick in the pants. Like, okay, now is a perfect time to go ahead and pursue my dream of actually living abroad. So in January 2020, I ended up booking a one-way ticket to Bali. And as we all know what happened shortly after that, COVID hit. So basically got quote unquote stuck in Bali during COVID. And I ended up staying when most tourists fled. And during that whole time, because I had obviously already wanted to start a business, I was like, okay, well, this is literally the perfect time to start a business because I'm going to have to either like fly back to the States and, live with my mom at the time, which I was like, I don't really necessarily want to do that. So I'm going to stay here. I ended up launching my own online business. I really ended up starting with like Instagram consultations for small business owners because like that's what I knew working for the startup Instagram marketing company. And then I then pivoted to offering like full-time social media management services to like creatives. I specifically kind of niched down to like the wedding industry when I first started, but I have since expanded to like creatives and female-led brands. And then I launched a podcast and I lived in Bali for 3.5 years. I'm currently based in Australia, so I'm kind of like wrapping up my year my year visa. But I've now been a digital nomad for 4 years, which is absolutely crazy to think about because I never anticipated this life for myself. But here we are.
Yeah, no, nice. No, you were just starting on your digital nomad and I was just tapering off because I was in Bali 2019 for 6 weeks in February. So like not nearly close to 3 years, but interesting. No, it's such a cool experience to live in another country and to be able to like establish a routine and like have a favorite coffee shop and a gym and like make friends. And like, I miss that a lot because I grew up in San Diego, which San Diego is a great place to be from. And I love living here, but there is something really incredible, especially as like a new business owner, which is like the scariest time to travel. How did you find that you grew like your skill set and your circle of influence? Like how did that change just by being in that kind of environment? Whereas if you had stayed in the States, do you feel like it would have been different?
Yeah, definitely different. I mean, as you know, Bali is very much like a digital nomad hub.
Totally.
So you're kind of like surrounded by entrepreneurs, which was really great for me because like at the time, as obviously as I just mentioned, like I had really no idea kind of like the direction that I really wanted to take. Like I knew I wanted to do social media marketing, but I was like, I don't really understand this whole building a business thing. So it was really helpful going to like they had Dojo co-working at the time. I think they actually got rid of it, but at the time, like right before COVID hit, I was trying to go to Dojo co-working. I was going to all these co-working and networking events, even though at the time I was super shy, super introverted. I also don't drink alcohol, but I was still going to like the beach and beers night just to like meet people and mingle and talk with other entrepreneurs. So I think just being in that environment really helped me realize like, okay, this is definitely what I want to do. I just started asking business owners for advice, even if they weren't in my exact same field. Like, yes, there's definitely a lot of other social media managers in Bali, but there's like a lot of people in like the tech space, the design space. And it was just really neat to kind of hear how they personally built up their businesses. And then I was kind of able to apply a lot of things that they personally told me into my own business. So yes, the short answer is Bali very significantly helped me kind of like, have that runway to actually go ahead and launch my business.
Well, and I think it's something that people who are starting new businesses overlook is that who you spend time around influences how you think, the moves that you make, everything like that. I'm super blessed in that my parents are entrepreneurial, my aunt, my grandmother, my great grandmother, my sister, like I'm constantly surrounded by business owners. So when I had a client project go sideways, like I had people to talk to about it. And that is such an asset. But also I think when you're just starting, you forget how much you don't know and you don't even know how to ask the question. But sometimes like just being in the room with someone else that asked a question where you're like, that would have never crossed my mind. Like I miss that. I miss that kind of like, and we have it here, but not to the same extent in the way that like you have a place like Bali, which is really, like you said, entrepreneurship hub. There's constantly events. There's constantly people there that are literally there to work on their business. But you've arrived at a really beautiful place where you now have multiple packages. Talk to us about how you landed on those packages, because as I've learned with my own business, like sometimes the service, again, you don't know what services you're going to offer until people start asking for the same thing consistently. And you're like, maybe I should offer this. So talk to us about what you've got and how you got to what you now offer.
Yeah, definitely. So when I first started, like I mentioned, I was just kind of doing like Instagram audits and consultations because I really didn't know what else to do at that point in time. So I was just kind of offering these for free, honestly, in the very beginning, just to kind of build up that experience. Like, yes, I've actually done consulting at the Instagram marketing company. So I did already have like a bit of experience under my belt, but I was just able to like offer these free consultations to business owners and just kind of start to learn like, who do I actually want to work with? Because as you know, when you first start out, you're kind of like, I'll work with anybody and anybody. But then you slowly
Mhm.
realize, oh, I actually don't want to work with anybody and anybody. So like
Mhm.
that to me, I was like, I actually really enjoy working with creatives. And like at that time, like I mentioned, just kind of niching down to wedding creatives. So from there, I actually started I offered Pinterest management and Instagram marketing. So Pinterest management was kind of like my first client. And then from there, I pivoted and I was like, okay, I like Pinterest, but it's just not really my bread and butter. Like I fully love Instagram marketing, like with everything. So I was like, I really want to niche down to Instagram marketing. So that is personally what I did. And I started offering social media management services. So to kind of answer your question on in terms of like the services that I now offer today. So in terms of like free resources, as you know, I obviously have a podcast called The Tropical Social. I think we just hit 115 episodes, which is really exciting. And I know
Nice.
you're at 170, which is like goals. So we're slowly getting up there. But yeah, I have a podcast. I trying to like kind of repurpose a podcast into blog posts. I
Yeah.
am, slowly getting there. I offer a lot of Instagram tips and I have a newsletter and like a few freebies. So that's kind of like the free resources that I offer. And then in terms of my first paid package, that is called the Kaha. So because my whole brand is kind of around like the tropical, I love all things tropical. I try to kind of find like Hawaiian names. So the first paid package is called Kaha. It is the consulting call. And basically, the Kaha means place or setting. So I just really love the name. And I was like, this can really help establish your brand's presence online. And then the next one is the Makata, and it is my done for you VIP social media strategy package. And so the Makata means like gift, and it offers like a
Nice.
comprehensive, like personality driven social media strategy. And then lastly is the Ohana package, which if you watch Stitch, we all know that that means family. That is like my social media management service where I just handle all your day to day social media tasks. So those are kind of like the main three packages that I offer along with the free resources.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. I mean,
Yeah.
I was like, holy moly. Because social media management, even Instagram management, I feel like in our lifetimes that first of all, that didn't exist as a job 20,
Yeah.
30 years ago. Secondly, I think that what a lot of what I see in the Facebook group and in my comment section and in DMs are people who are working on the corporate side who are like, I'm somehow expected to do all of this.
Yep.
Like I am one person. I do not have a department. I do not have what I need. And my boss is expecting me to run social for this entire company. I think a lot about those people. So I think about a lot of those people also listen to the podcast. But what are some of the things for someone who's in that position? Like, how do you, as a social media manager, stay up to date on trends and features and rollouts and new apps? Like, are you a person that is an early adopter, or are you more of a, I want to see how this plays out and like come up with a strategy later? Like, I'm going to observe first.
Kind of both, I guess. I mean, I do kind of like to observe because as we all know, when like new things launch, they don't necessarily always go to plan, like, Clubhouse and those kind of apps.
Sure,
I
sure.
kind of wanted to jump on the wagon a little bit later just because I was like, I don't really know if this is going to stick. And as you said, like, I don't want to spread myself too thin. Like, I really
Yeah.
cannot be the all-in-one, type of person. I will definitely burn myself out. But in terms of just like staying up to date, I just think that me being a social media manager and a mentor, I think that's something that I pride myself in is that I'm still in it. Like I am still
Right.
actually doing the social media management services. So naturally, as you know, just being on Instagram, being on TikTok, you're going to see like the trends kind of shift. Like, I just think that things have massively shifted even in the past 3-4 years, as you have probably seen as
I
well.
mean, but even like let's just look at Instagram as an
Yeah.
app, right? Like the amount of content that
Yep.
that Instagram wants to see from your account to deem it as like account worth following or worth being
Yep.
suggested. Like you have posts, you have carousel posts, you have
Yep.
reels, you have stories, you have like lives. Like there's so much strategy to be had in all of those aspects that didn't used to exist. So how are
Exactly.
you talking through with clients? Like I know you have your done for you service and then you have your done with you kind of option, right? Like content calendar, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. How are you helping people just map out what's worth their time spent?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I mostly focus on Instagram. So I do kind of help with TikTok a little bit, but in terms of when it comes to business owners, like as we all know, if you are trying to manage your own socials, which a lot of times with the Miakana, like the VIP social media strategy package, that's what they're coming towards, right? Like
Sure.
they actually want me to hand over a social media strategy. But with that said, like I want to make sure that it is something that they can go ahead and implement and it's not something that's going to go and overwhelm them and they're going to get this strategy and be like, oh my God, I don't have the time to do this. So it's really about figuring out like, okay, where are you at with your business? How much time can you actually spend on social media? And then what do you actually want to be known for? So we're not trying to be known on all these different platforms, like TikTok and Instagram and Pinterest, like you in the beginning stages.
Sure.
And especially when you are stretched in for time, I really recommend like trying to find a schedule that you can consistently stick with. And just because another business owner is posting 5-7 times a week does not mean that you necessarily need to be doing the same. It's really just about finding what particularly works for you, but making sure that you're actually infusing your brand so that each piece of content is actually moving the needle forward and you're not just posting just to get out a post on there.
Exactly.
Because that's not going to do anything. Yeah.
How are you navigating? This is now out of personal curiosity. How are you navigating the conversation with clients about people's user behavior with Instagram? I think more in the last year, we've seen people like take a break from Instagram or not post as much or not post at all, like are less engaged, especially on like a brand front. But then on the flip side of the coin, like you still need to have the presence and you still need to have the posts out there. But I don't know if you've seen this too, is like that's been really reflected in the analytics. It's like the numbers that we used to be getting a year ago are not anywhere near what we're getting now. And it's lower now. And I think that's a lot to do with how the algorithm has changed, how the apps have changed, user behavior has changed. There's just a lot of factors at play. And it's hard to sometimes describe that to clients, like because they're not in it in a day-to-day sense, that to tell them that like, hey, listen, this is happening across the board for everybody. Like it's not just your account. I swear to God. Like, how are you having those conversations and navigating that? Like, because you are, especially when you're only on one platform or you're focused on one platform, you are kind of like, it's kind of like a buoy stuck on on the ocean, right? Where you kind of do have to go with the flow to a certain extent. I'm curious if you've had that conversation and how that's been going.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like you said, it is just kind of upfront and just saying like, hey, this is happening across the board. And also just like setting those expectations from the beginning. I know this was something that I made a mistake and just kind of onboarded clients that were like, oh, I want to have 10,000 followers in XYZ months. And I'm like, okay, because I'm like, I didn't really know any better at the time. But now it's like, okay, setting the expectation that growth is a lot slower on Instagram and like really just kind of seeing like what is actually working, because what worked, as you said, 2-3 years ago is not what works today. And I think it's really about infusing your brand personality and you into your content, because people don't really care about the tips and the tricks. And like, sure, it's helpful, but like you also want to think about like your audience. So for me personally, sharing tips and tricks, I actually have like 2 different audiences. So it is a little bit of a mix. But like for a business owner, they're not going to really want to consume that content because they want me to take over their social media, right? So when it comes to brands, you're like, okay, how does this benefit them? And I think that's like a major mindset shift that a lot of business owners had needed to be taking these past few years.
Yeah.
And that I feel like a lot of the content originally was kind of just like, look at me, I'm making 6 figures, blah, blah, blah. But it's like nobody cares about that anymore. It's like, what can you actually do for them? And then, yeah, just really setting the standard that this is across the board. Like user behavior has changed. People's attention spans are just, very small, as we all know. Like even just scrolling through TikTok, you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Mm-hmm. So you have to find different ways to actually catch people's attentions, whether that is with like a really catchy hook, different visuals, like actually adding storytelling, I think is absolutely huge nowadays because people want to feel that connection to you. But yeah, I think just really setting the expectation that Instagram is not what it used to be, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't work.
Well, and maybe you're similar to me, but I like to use my own social as like the testing ground for what I'm trying to recommend to my clients.
Yep.
And there's 2 strategies we've implemented more this year that have been really helpful. One of them is like, we call it like a content flood, where we will post about the same topic, like 14 posts in a row, 12 posts in a row. And it's more of a way to like, if we have a project, for example, and that project goes live, like to really tell that whole story, because I'm not so concerned about how many likes or engagement that like like individual post is getting, but I want when someone does come to my page for them to see like a whole chunk, like a whole big fat piece of the feed dedicated to this like really stellar case study project, instead of it just being like one post here, one post there, one post over here. That was really successful for us. So we're right in the middle of another one of those rollouts right now. And it's almost treating our brand as if the project that we worked on was like a campaign launch. So like shifting the mentality from like, oh, this is our all the time portfolio to this is like our right here, right now. This is what we're working on, what we're proud of. And the other thing, which I'm wondering if you've experimented with, is participating more in cultural like common events and relating it to the brand instead of just constantly going with evergreen content. Right. So I just attempted to record a solo podcast episode about how brands can participate in like Olympics cultural phenomenon, right? Like thinking about Super Bowl or the Taylor Swift impact, or, you know, finding those moments where you can relate it back to your brand and like be part of a larger conversation and just be able to pipe up on behalf of your brand and like have something to say. What are some other suggestions or tactics or strategies that you've implemented more recently that maybe are counterintuitive or like opposite to what everybody else might be telling you to do? Can you think of any off the top of your head?
I mean, I do think that jumping on like, you know, cultural things going on in the world is great, but I have seen brands do it where it's not relevant to them at all. And I think that's where brands kind of, you know, customers can easily spot like, oh, you're just doing this just to hop on the trend, and it's not really authentic to them. So I think that is kind of where brands are kind of going wrong, is that people can easily see right through it. And so that's when I say like really only jump on these trends or these kind of like cultural things going on when it is relevant to your brand. Yes, sorry, did that answer your question?
No, it does. No, that's a good take. I forget that there are ones that are big missteps, right? Because I'm always like putting the brands in my mind that I'm like, they crushed that, they crushed that, they crushed that. You know what I mean? But it's true. Like, I think there has to be a certain amount of brand alignment. I think we're also headed into a political season, which can be kind of dicey on social media,
especially in the US.
So I'm glad that you have more of the cautious view, because I'm more like post and then face the repercussions later.
I mean,
it's honestly, more my style.
I think that's great. I mean, obviously it depends on like who your client is. And obviously if it's your brand, you know, you do whatever you want and experiment. But I think when it comes to clients, there is a little bit more of a line of what you can and cannot do and what's actually relevant to them. But yeah, I definitely will say like the politics and all the things that's going to be coming later this year. You know, if that is something that's relevant to your brand, obviously you jump on it. But if it's not, it's like a little bit of like a thin line of, you know, how to personally, like, you know,
yeah, no, it definitely is. And I think it's a good chance to, and the conversations I'm planning to have with my clients are like, hey, this is a really good time to remind people of your values. Like, you don't need to straight up say like who you're voting for or what you're like, who so-and-so this, that, the other thing. But if you can remind people of like, hey, at this place, we believe blank, blank, blankety blank, then you're kind of saying it without saying it. And if those are truly your values, then you should hold strong to your values. Like,
exactly.
Like, it should be no surprise that me as a female-owned agency, like, I believe in a woman's right to choose. Like, that should not be a shock to anyone. But also, I think that you're so right, is like brands do have to take that into consideration more so than your average individual. But I also think it's a beautiful moment for brands to say things, to come and support the causes that they care about and champion the ideas that mean something to them, regardless of whether you're going to lose customers. Yes. Talk about that. Talk about how your social media is supposed to also repel people, because I think a lot of clients, when they sign on, they're like, I want all these views and I want all these followers, and it's going to be like, that's what's going to get me more sales. But that's not necessarily the case.
No. And like, you don't want everybody and anybody to be following you, because that's like really not going to benefit your brand or your business. Like, you know, there is a level of being, you know, controversial to an extent, because you also want to repel those people who are not going to be your ideal clients. Like, if you have ever worked in customer service, let's say, you know that there are nightmare clients, right? Like, you don't really want to be speaking to those types of clients in your content. Just like you don't really want to be necessarily talking to customers and just saying like, oh, we're just going to be providing all this free stuff, let's say, then you're just going to be attracting all those clients who are going to expect free things from you. So there is kind of like that balance. But I will say that your content does need to repel people that do not want working with you and actually attract those people that are in line. So like you mentioned, just kind of stating your values and things like that is going to naturally attract those people without actually having to state like, hey, this is exactly what I'm voting living for, like people will naturally say, oh, I have similar values. Like I actually want to go ahead and follow your account and learn more.
Yeah, it's interesting how much we've seen that, I feel like, shift even in the last 4 years. Like, I think so much of having a business account on Instagram, so much of the strategy suggestion was like, tell people your coffee order and let them know your dog's name. And like, it was this way of making us feel closer, but then we kind of got lost in the sauce, I think, especially as women, like with what Instagram marketing strategy even really is. Because I've followed people for years and I'm like, I couldn't, like, gun to my head, I could not tell you what it is that you do for a job. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's that fine line of like, there, yes, you want to share like your values and who you are and what you care about. And that's part of marketing. That's part of letting people into that know, like, trust. But I think we also like lost how to position ourselves as service providers and product people. Do you agree? You're nodding your head, so I feel like yes.
Yeah.
How do you feel like it's changed even since you started?
I mean, I've just seen like the coaching space go from constantly like, I don't know, I mean, we could go down a whole rabbit hole with that, especially living in Bali. But I just think that, like, I guess in terms of like branding, like it is not just about talking about like your services or what you have to offer. Like, yes, that is great. But at the end of the day, like there are a million other brand designers, there are a million other social media managers and VAs and coaches. So like at this point in time, because the industry has gotten so much more saturated in the last few years, especially because of COVID, which is, you know, great that there are more people starting businesses, but at the same time, that does mean that there is more competition for you.
Right.
So it is really showing like the person behind the brand, like the person behind the services, like what would it actually look like to go ahead and work with you? What does your process look like? That experience, etc., versus just saying like tips and tricks, which is something that very much worked back in like 2020, was just being like, here's an Instagram tip and here's some content ideas to post. And like nowadays, like everybody was posting that. So it's just like redundant. So you really want to show like who you are behind the brand and why somebody is going to work with you versus another service provider out there.
And I think too, to the other side of that spectrum, there was also an Instagram coachy kind of strategy about how everyone should be posting these like long, heartfelt. There's a comedian that does a really funny bit that says like, you know, it's over for your guy friend when he's talking about like his alpha tendencies. And he's like, you know, it's over for girls on Instagram when they start a caption with my journey, broken heart emoji. You're like, oh God. Here we go, right? Like there's that thing is like I've found that the longer I'm in business, the more like personally private I am. Like I'm happy to share behind the scenes. I'm happy to tell you anything about, like I'm very much an open book, but it is interesting. Like I've noticed this palpable shift of like people wanting to, I think it's Neil Brennan, now that I remember the comedian, like share their trauma as a marketing tactic.
Yep,
which I find a little bit yucky. What do you think?
Yep, I agree because I think there was this push for like, you know, being authentic online, which is great. But then it's like people didn't know how to be authentic, which is kind of ironic. And so they're like, oh, look at me and my story. And like, even for me, like, yes, I've obviously talked about getting cheated on, moving to Bali. Like, that's my story. But like,
it's different than being every single caption being like, it's like a weird pity thing. And it's yucky.
And I think there's like a level of using, you know, vulnerability to create connection. But like I always say, when it comes to building your brand, like you get to choose the bits and pieces that you want to share. And like, yes, if you want to be more open, by all means, share what you want. Obviously, that kind of works for Alex Earl. But also, if you like look at Alex Earl, like there are definitely things that you don't know about her. Like she picks and chooses like what she shares, and she's very strategic if you look at it from like a business angle. But I very much agree that I think I definitely saw this in Bali where just people like overshare to the point where it's like, how is this relevant to your business and how is this relevant to me?
Well, and it starts to dip into a place of like, I don't know that me learning about that is helpful in me hiring you. Because that's the other thing is like, that's fine if you have a certain amount of rapport with your audience and if you have a close friends on your Instagram, sure. Like there's like your clients, like if you have that kind of rapport with them where you have that kind of honest, open candor. But I'm also, every time I'm posting, I'm considering that someone is coming across my stuff for the first time.
Yep.
And it's like, what is actually the meat and potatoes of this thing? And to not be as swayed by I feel like people try to emulate what they see other people doing as well, which
Yep,
kind of
very
ends up,
much.
that's how you end up on this slippery slope of things don't feel authentic. It's like,
Yep.
well, so-and-so wrote this long of a caption with these 7 pictures in a carousel, so therefore I'm going to. And I
Yep.
think that's can be in a lot of times a distraction. So one of the
Yeah.
things I talk about in my mentor group, which is part of our like bingo challenge for the year, is recommending to people that feel imposter syndrome, stop following people in your industry and
Yep.
start following people you can help.
Yep.
Start following the accounts of the types of brands you want to work for. Start following the business owners that need what you offer. And you'll stop feeling so much imposter syndrome because you'll start to see there's a lot of people that need what you do.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite little like hacks. Are there things that you do in your own social media scrolling habits that you're like, gosh, if all my clients would just do this, it would be better?
Honestly, I think the whole unfollowing people in your industry is a great hack. I think so often, especially when it comes to social media managers, like obviously for myself, I have 2 different parts of my businesses. So yes, I am also catering to
Sure.
social media managers, but I know in the early stages, a lot of social media managers will literally just start following everybody else in their space. So they're literally only following social media managers. They're actually creating content for other social media managers because they're looking at what all these other early stage social media managers are doing. So they're all literally just talking amongst themselves, but they're not actually, getting clients or actually speaking to the people who would necessarily hire them. So I think that's like a big thing is like stop looking at everybody else in your industry. Like, yes, I do think that there's a level of just seeing like what are your competitors doing, what's actually working for them. Like reading comments well is something that I personally like to do, especially on like more established brands and just seeing like what questions are people actually asking on other like competitor accounts, because those are great content ideas for you. And then you can go ahead and put your own spin and take on it. So that's like a great tip there. Also, just like going on Google. So just seeing like,
Truly.
for podcasts, like what podcast topics like really resonate with you, or going on YouTube and just typing in like a keyword like social media marketing and just seeing like what kind of YouTube videos are actually kind of popping up on that first page. Obviously, if it relates to your brand in any way, like that obviously to me is like a topic that relates. And just seeing like, okay, cool. Like, what are the top videos? How did they word them? What are they talking about in this video? Is it interesting? Did I find it boring? Usually they have like a catchy hook. So it's kind of taking that and then also implementing it into your own way. And then again, like reading YouTube comments, reading TikTok comments, Instagram.
Yeah. And as we talked about earlier, like there's so many subsections of Instagram to be an expert in. Like you could position yourself as a stories expert, a reels expert, a posts expert, a strategy expert, a branding expert. Like there's so many ways. Like I'm doing this now with YouTube and with the podcast. It's like I'm 170 episodes in. I just got lights and a studio set up and a nice looking camera after 170 episodes. But it was one of those things where it's like, I know that I want our YouTube presence to be stronger. And the biggest thing holding me back from making YouTube videos was the gear. And it's like, okay, well, you have the money, go get the gear. Like, what are you doing? So it's like finding those little things, but you can do that. I feel like with Instagram as well, is like, okay, my reels could be better. How could my reels be? They don't need to be amazing, but how could they be 20% better? How could they be 30% better? And just like focusing in as like a subject matter expert, I think is also overlooked in social media management, because it's this idea of like, I'm going to do all the things for all the people when really you can really hone in on one specific skill set.
Agreed. And I think that's a really great way of why so many social media managers are actually burning themselves out, because they are offering anything and everything. And they're like, oh my gosh, TikTok popped up, so I need to be on that, and Instagram and Pinterest and email marketing. And it's like at the end of the day, because you're so spread thin, like people don't actually know what you're necessarily like great at. And so like that's why for me, like I specialize in Instagram. Like I love Instagram marketing. And like, yes, I do add TikTok on as like an additional, but like I really mainly talk about Instagram. And so when it comes to like your business or your brand, like really think about like your main service that you like want to be selling and what you want to be offering, because especially for social media managers, like I don't think that they actually take into consideration like what do you actually want to be doing? Like, do you actually want to be writing emails? If not, why are you offering this service? So it's like really honing in on like, yes, like what do your clients want from you, but also like what do you yourself want to offer? Because if you're not happy with it, you're only going to go so far, because you're going to be dreading doing that client work.
And also, you can change your mind, which is something that I wish someone would have told me a hell of a lot sooner. It's like you can, like we used to offer websites long time ago. Like when I was in Bali, that was probably the last website that I worked on. And I was like, nope, I'm not doing this anymore. And so we just focused on branding and then branding and social and then branding, social, merch, packaging. And now by the time we're doing branding, social, merch, packaging, like, could we figure out how to make a website for someone? Like, yes, like we have the skills. You know what I mean? So it's like now I'm starting to maybe dabble with the idea of building websites because I do mine. You know what I mean? Like it's like, well, here we go. But you can change your mind. You know what I mean? But that was like a 5-year span where I was like, not touching it. So it's interesting. I think that like entrepreneurship, especially online entrepreneurship, there's this idea that there's like a million things that you could be doing at all times, that sometimes it's hard to stay focused. But I love that you picked Instagram and really kind of stuck with it.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, if anyone wants to find, follow, work with you, etc., please plug where they can do those things. And of course, we'll continue this conversation over on Tropical Social Podcast
I am so excited.
Very soon. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm so excited to have you on mine. But you can go ahead and find me and connect with me on Instagram at Shannon Segall, Segall, website shannonsegall.com. And then the podcast is the Tropical Social, where you can tune in on Apple, Spotify, wherever you tune into your favorite podcast. And as I mentioned to you, your listeners can actually get $100 off the VIP social media strategies. So just slide me a DM that you came from this episode, and I'm more than happy to honor that discount for you.
Perfect. And we'll include that in the show notes as well. So be sure to check that out. If you love the episode, guys, don't forget to share, save, send to a friend, post on your stories, tag us. We'd love to see it. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.